Alright, everybody, we are down to just two more categories left for my best of 2023 entry. We're going to finish it before the end of January. It's a small miracle. But we got a very big topic for today. Is this going to be my favorite roguelikes, roguelites, and everything else that involves Rogue that came out this year. So for this entry, we have a whole lot of runner-ups because we played a ton of roguelikes. And in order to try and differentiate this, we're going to be focusing on games that are specifically built on a run-by-run basis. So games like Against the Storm that I gave a nomination, or I think I gave them one of the best of for city building, is not going to apply here, despite the fact that it is, well, a roguelike city builder. So I wanted to use it specifically for games that kind of focused on roguelike or roguelite progression as kind of like the main focal point of the design. Alright, so like I said, this is going to be an almost never-ending list of runner-ups, and we're going to start things with 30XX. This is the sequel to, 20XX. That combine an action roguelite with Mega Man X, and 30XX, there's a lot of X's in that last sentence, does not disappoint in that respect, featuring even more beautiful pixels, and I think this is like 32-bit styles of color, all with the kind of still procedural action Mega Man style gameplay. What keeps it from making it to the top of the list for me is that it still feels a little bit limited in the roguelike elements. This is still an action platformer first and foremost. And if you're not good at dashing, jumping, dash jumping, wall dash jumping, and all that, the roguelike elements aren't really going to work for you. I was hoping to see more variance between the runs beyond, again, just what items you get and what order the bosses. But if you enjoyed 20XX, then this is an easy recommendation for you. Our next runner-up is a game that is, well, it says what it is directly on the title, and that is Wizard with a Gun. This is a kind of survival crafter, but all framed around a roguelike style. As you're trying to rebuild the world, one piece, one unlock at a time, and your wizard has, well, the literal magic of gun in order to aid them. The game tries to walk this line between the kind of survival, durability, have to collect lots and lots of resources, with that of an action roguelike or roguelite, as you unlock permanent upgrades, which will then allow you to build more stuff, let you do more in the world before time runs out, etc., etc. It's a very great concept. What keeps it from making it to the top of the list for me is that I didn't really feel like the survival aspects and the roguelike or roguelite aspects were really working fully in sync. And it did fall in that same kind of issue of, say, a Don't Starve, where you're still always going to be gathering resources. Like, it never felt like it grew beyond that basic, I still have to gather these things and then craft more of this, and now my gun's out of ammo, so let me craft a new one. And I was kind of hoping for more on the roguelite elements to kind of remove some of that early game frustration. But the aesthetics and design of this one are certainly well done, and if you're looking for, again, that kind of in-between of a roguelite and a survival crafter, then this is a great game to play, and it does come with co-op to boot. Our next one is a game that is 100% an indie game I'm sure we can all agree on, and that is Dave the Diver. Jokingly aside, despite everyone having trouble deciding what is an indie, what isn't an indie, and all the horrors that go in with that, this is still a very well done diving/cooking sim style roguelite, as you play as Dave the Diver, who is trying to help the sushi restaurant in a mysterious part of the ocean succeed. And to do that, we are going to dive deep, gather lots of food, watch a whole lot of hilarious and irrelevant cutscenes, and get more power, progression, and all that. It's a great core gameplay loop, but it didn't really evolve beyond that. Similar to my issues with 30XX, it just felt like once I got into like the routine of the game, that was it. But there's still many more hours of questing and doing the side stuff, and waiting for the next deadline to move the story forward, and so on. So it did kind of like wear itself out before the end, but still a very enjoyable and entertaining time for anyone looking for a little bit of action, diving, cooking, and rogueliking to go with everything. Our next runner-up is Deadlink, another in the, well, we're getting very established FPS roguelike genre, as you are trying to beat simulations in a cyberpunk future using various robotic frames. There's a mysterious story going around, what is real, what isn't, or you can just ignore that and do all the shooting, powering up, and, of course, run after run after run. The gunplay in this one is kind of a more like grounded or hefty take on, say, like a Doom Eternal or Halo style. While you are going to be jumping and dashing around the arena, you're not as fast or as agile as, say, Doom, Ultra Kill, and so on. There's a greater emphasis on your primary weapons, or your primary and secondary, as what you choose at the beginning is going to stay with you for the most part, but you can unlock additional versions, modifiers, and so on. The game does some very interesting things with the various frames, and how you can unlock different kind of modifiers to their special abilities that can change how they interact. There are hidden things to find each level. This is a game that is definitely more, I would say, like roguelike first, and then FPS second, if that makes any sense. What keeps it from being on the top of the list, well, quite frankly, is that there's another FPS roguelike that we play that gets top honors, and with that spoiler, you should probably know by now what that game is. But Deadlink is a very solid game. And it's very, again, interesting to see these different FPS roguelikes featuring very different takes on the roguelike elements, the persistent or progression, and of course the gunplay. So if you're looking for an FPS with a bit of roguelike in it, Deadlink is still a very solid recommendation, and so will be my top game, or one of the top games, spoiler warning for later in this video. We have a lot of games that were in early access that finally came out in 2023, and they all kind of made it to the runner-up list in some way, shape, or form. And our first one is Doomsday Hunters. This is a game that was originally called like Vlad. It was supposed to be like a, I guess, homage to like the Bitmap Brothers era of games. But they decided, or they were forced, to change their name to Doomsday Hunters to avoid any kind of legal issues. This is an isometric, kind of like 3/4 quarters view, gun-based roguelike. So think of it like an Enter the Gungeon. Instead of being top-down, it's more at an angle, featuring some very interesting and unique aesthetics and enemy designs. You are exploring multiple realities trying to deal with Dracula, who is not only the head of vampires, but he's also an eldritch time dimension hopping super beast. And you're going to have to defeat him or find him one multiverse at a time. The game features a whole lot of upgrades and persistence with new characters, new weapons, new systems, features, secondary, specials, magic, and whatnot to unlock. There is a lot here, and if you're a fan of Enter the Gungeon or The Binding of Isaac in terms of sheer persistence, this is one of those games you're going to enjoy. What keeps it from making it to the top of the list is that I did find that I wasn't really enjoying the persistence as much as, say, those other games, as in order to get further and further in, you have to make the game harder, which changes the rules in different ways. If you have played a Gungeon and a lot of the other shooter or top-down roguelikes or roguelites, then this one does again fall into that same package. Still a fantastic game, but it can be a little over the top in terms of keeping track of what is going on. Lots of things happening on screen in this one, but still a fantastic game that is certainly worth your time if you enjoyed Enter the Gungeon and looking for another game in that similar style. And speaking of that special style, the next runner-up is Voidigo, yet another in the action roguelike genre Again, very similar to that of Enter the Gungeon, but featuring a very clay-like, very unusual aesthetic to this one. It's funny that we have two action roguelites, both featuring completely different aesthetics and tone compared to everything else. This one features a very healthy mix of guns, melee, and so on, as you're trying to bring reality back after things went completely awry. This one features a huge variety in terms of weapons, secondary items. There's this kind of like Monster Hunter element as you're trying to track down the boss in each one of the zones, being able to upgrade your various tools, do additional challenges, and so on. There are a few things that keep it off the top of the list for me. The first thing is that the persistent elements didn't feel as interesting, or as adding as much oomph to the game compared to, say, a Doomsday Hunters or some of the other games that we've talked about. I also found a little bit frustrating to play. This is a game that, much like with Doomsday Hunters, just overloads your senses in terms of bullets, particle effects, explosions, ripples, shaking, and more. And when you're trying to play this on the higher difficulties and everything is happening at one time, the game's visibility or clarity just goes down. And it led to a lot of my deaths simply because I couldn't even process what was happening on the screen. Of the action roguelikes for this list, this one is certainly going to be on the harder one if you're trying to go for all the unlocks, all the challenges, visit a true ending, and all that. But there is a lot of challenging game here if you enjoy a good old action roguelite. And we have, surprise, surprise, another game that was in early access for a long time on the runner-up list, and that is World of Horror. The Junji Ito visual novel roguelike experience, as you are trying to save your town and the world from the arrival of an elder god, and you must explore and get into ever increasingly disturbing situations in order to make it out alive and sane. Once again, the aesthetics of this game are fantastic, being just a great companion to the works of Junji Ito. What keeps it off the list is that all the issues I had with this game in terms of RNG, lack of clarity in terms of your decisions, and just the general feel of this game being a little too out of control were never really looked at or changed in early access. It still feels very clunky to learn, very frustrating when you lose and there's just nothing you could have done, quite literally just due to RNG, to avoid it. This is a game that's definitely more about vibes than it is about a careful plan or mastering its mechanics. If you're looking for a very story-rich roguelike, not so much one where you're going to have a lot of control or manipulation, but one where you can just really go on a crazy ride, no pun intended, then you should at least give this one a check. Another entry that I forgot about for the runner-ups for Best Roguelikes, because again there are so many of them, is of course Darkest Dungeon 2, which went from being a kind of grand campaign style RPG to being more on the roguelite side for their sequel. Once again, the aesthetics and art direction are phenomenal. Wayne June doing more of his gravely voiced narration, the kind of shift to this 2.5D 3D style where the characters and their animations pop. The game itself is a very interesting case. Mechanically speaking, I like Darkest Dungeon 2 more than the first game, but I felt the first game was more appealing of a play, being more of a grand campaign structure rather than the roguelite side. The issue that I have with Darkest Dungeon 2, what keeps it from getting to the top of the list, is that while the individual mechanics are better, it still felt punishing in a different way compared to the first game. Because you're dealing with ever increasingly amounts of random events that can happen, diseases, what items you get, it's a game that leads in that kind of feast or famine of a roguelite. There are people who have beaten this game quite easily on the highest difficulty, every hard modifier attached, they figure out the perfect team compositions, but it didn't feel as rewarding to me to play compared to the first one. It felt more like you had to already know going in what your overall game plan was going to be for that run, rather than kind of the run influencing your game plan, if that makes any sense. In a way, it reminds me a lot of the issues I had with the final dungeon of Darkest Dungeon 1, where it went less about kind of the exploration and more about, okay, this particular area requires this, this, and this. Did you bring a team to compensate? Yes/no. Now, the game has received updates since we played it, adding in another character, more RNG and nightmares to deal with, and again, I would say Darkest Dungeon 2 is a better game, but I'm not sure if I would say it's a better sequel or better in the franchise. And this is one that I'm curious for those of you watching, how did your thoughts ultimately end up on it? But be that as it may, it is still a very impressive roguelike. And if you're looking for a game that's a lot about challenge, difficulty, and trying to keep those lights on, then it is still a very easy recommendation, provided you're not looking for the same exact gameplay as in the first one. For our last runner-up, it is Dungeon Drafters. This is a deck builder meets mystery dungeon roguelike, where you are trying to solve the mysteries of an island, and to do that you must learn a magic via cards, explore various areas complete with their own environmental hazards, enemies, and challenges, and try to make it back alive so you can spend all that sweet, sweet loot unlocking more cards to enhance your deck and get further in. This one is definitely an interesting case. While there is deck building involved, this is not, I would say, like a true deck builder. Tactics and positioning are going to be more important or equally important as to what cards you have access to. I like the different elemental types not only being 100% unique from one another, but providing you with many powerful and potentially game-breaking concepts and abilities if you play your cards right. Pun intended on that one. What keeps it from making it to the top of the list is that it is incredibly slow-paced as a roguelite. You see, in order to unlock new cards and get more upgrades like that, you must make it back from each dungeon. So a lot of your early time in this game is going to be spent doing like a floor on a dungeon, immediately running out, hopefully getting some good cards in the boosters, rinse and repeat until your deck is halfway to 3/4 of the way viable before you can even attempt some of the later challenges, boss fights, and so on. Because if you die, you lose everything. And it definitely slows down the pacing of this one quite a bit because of it. So this is one that I enjoyed it, but if they could have just sped things up a little bit more in terms of the roguelite and the progression side, this could have been a phenomenal game. If you're a deck building fan who's looking for another game that really has great card variety and depth, but again, this is still a roguelike first, then you should at least give this one a try. Alright, time for the top 4. And they could not be further apart in terms of their designs for this year. And we're going to start with Wall World. This is a game that is very much inspired by Dome Keeper. Dome Keeper being another fantastic roguelike that came out, I believe it was last year, which you should definitely play. So, double recommendation for this listing. But Wall World kind of recontextualizes this idea of surviving and doing mining, but instead of diving down deep, you are diving horizontally, as the world is literally a wall, and you must climb down, climb up, look for resources, clues, and more upgrades in order to solve the mysteries as to why we're all living on a giant wall. The aesthetics are pretty well done, and the game has a really great loop once again of mining and trying to get the resources, hurdling to bring them back to your mecha spider wall crawler, and then of course defending against myriads of enemies flying, running, and doing all kinds of things to get to you. There is a hefty load of persistence in terms of unlocking faster speeds, being able to get more resources faster, and I enjoy this one. I did wish that there was more content or more things to do once you kind of officially beat the game. There was DLC that did get released in August, which I have not played, but I still enjoy this concept. And again, if you enjoy Domekeeper, you'll probably enjoy this one. And the two games, I think, are at least different enough that they're both worth at least a check for you. And now we turn to another game that I loved its design from the very first minute I played it, and that is Backpack Hero, a backpack building roguelike, where you and your magical backpack must explore a mysterious dungeon looking for resources to help build your town. This game makes it on the list for some phenomenal aspects of the different mechanics, synergies, and your options in combat. Your backpack is essentially your deck in a way, where anything that gets put into it can be used in combat. But it goes further than that, with the fact that different items can be placed in various positions, which will affect their utility, enhance other items, change things, and whatnot. Obviously, stuff like armor can be worn, but you have to make sure that your boots are along the bottom of the backpack and your helmet's at the top. There is a wealth of ways to break this game because of all these systems. And with the additional characters complete with their own unique rules, special conditions for their backpacks, and their own game-breaking elements, this is a fantastic roguelike in terms of its design, mechanics, and systems. If you're someone who likes your roguelikes that are all about just how do I utterly destroy this game using all the tools that they give me, this is an easy recommendation and a phenomenal game. Our next pick is, surprise, surprise, another game that was in early access for a while that came out. It came out so quietly, I didn't even know that it was at 1.0 until I started looking at the list of my games to figure out what was going to be the top picks. And that is going to be Astral Ascent. This is in the Dead Cells 2D action roguelike side of things. You are trying to escape a prison guarded by the Zodiacs, and you are going to have to shoot, magic, punch, kick, and other things in your way to make it out. This one is a hefty amount of meta progression and persistent elements. The roguelite category or moniker is certainly apt here. As you explore the various randomized or procedurally generated areas, you'll gain a wide variety of resources that can be used to unlock new features, improve your base stats and skills of your characters, unlock new skills, change the world, and do a whole lot of other things along the way. The combat in this one is a little bit more on the floatier side compared to Dead Cells. But where Dead Cells went for kind of weird and weapons with all kinds of advanced rules, this game goes for different spells that can be enhanced further by adding different modifiers to them. The game can also be played co-op, which is a very fantastic feature. And of course, you'll have to decide or figure out where you're going to go and make do with which bosses and what order you're going to fight them in. This is definitely one that I need to go back to and play some more on stream now that it's out. But if you are a fan of the Dead Cells style of an action roguelite, this is again a very easy recommendation for you. And for our last pick, I don't know if you've heard this yet, but a lot of games that were in early access in previous years finally came out in 2023. And one of those was an FPS roguelite. And for the final, at the top of my list for best roguelike of this year, it goes to Roboquest. Roboquest is once again in that same style of a Gunfire Reborn, Deadlink earlier, and so on, where you are going to be exploring somewhat randomly generated areas, not so much procedural this time, but with a hefty dose of fantastic gunplay. Of the examples that we've talked about, and going back to Deadlink, this one is definitely more on the rapid high-speed play of a Doom Eternal or Ultra Kill. While the weapons are not as unique as, say, Gunfire Reborn, they all feel really great to use. There is even patches that rebounds and made some of the weapons better. You have different classes that come with their own primary, secondary ability, and an entire array of unique passive perks that can completely change, up and save, or doom your run if you're not too careful about how it all works. This one again is a major example of roguelite elements, as you'll unlock permanent upgrades, new features, and once you get access to all the movement tech in Roboquest, it feels like an entirely different game as you're jetpacking, double jumping, super jumping, and grapple hooking your way around. This one is on the challenging side, to say the least. And if you like the FPS or a very fast-paced shooter with a hefty dose of roguelite elements, this is again an exceptional take on the genre and a very, very easy recommendation by yours truly. And with that, we just have one more category left before Best in Show and all the other random general awards I'm going to have to give out. And it's going to be a simple one to end things with. What was it again? Oh, right, it's RPG. Because we didn't play any of those in 2023. But before the onslaught begins, any other phenomenal roguelikes, and all the other rogues that you enjoyed for 2023, let me know in the comments down below. Get a snack and a drink ready because we got RPGs coming up and there are a whole lot of them. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games.